Welcome back to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I am the host of the show, Phil Rose, and I am delighted to welcome back to Sparks by Ignium, Eric Stone. In our last episode, we talked about a number of different things around how Eric had created his book, Jumpstart. And we use that word jumpstart because I think there's a whole load of things that fit below it. But this one was specifically about jumpstarting your workplace culture. And I want to really dig into a bit more of this around jumpstarting is one thing, but sustaining it is another thing. So I've invited Eric back on the show to talk about the sustainability aspects of this. And I'd love to talk about the tips that we can talk about to really drive home how to bring this alive, how to sustain it, and keep that flywheel moving. Because it's very easy to lose momentum when the good guys leave at the top and we leave the next generation in charge. So what do we need to keep that going? So Eric, welcome back to the Sparks by Ignium podcast.
Bill, it is a pleasure to be back. I really enjoyed our first conversation.
Thank you. And before this, we've talked about a number of different things. And in this next one, I really want to go back to the beginning a bit, because sustainability is key in lots of different ways. And really talk about, what is it that defined you as an individual back in your days? Because on the last podcast, we talked about the Eric Stone, the 26 years in enterprise, how you built that business, you grew it up from a small team up to multi offices. And it was a family business, but there was something that kept you there for that length of time. And that was about the culture that was building in it. But it all started with you right at the beginning. So I wonder, can we go back a few years to think about, the Eric of young, what got you on this path and why are you here now? But let's go back to that beginning piece, I think, because I think there's a big point around that in building culture.
I think there's a few things we could share. I think the first thing personally is I grew up and I was the smallest kid in my class. I mean, the smallest. For a long, long time through high school, I actually grew a little bit in college. But that actually really taught me a lot of lessons. I had to learn to be scrappy and resilient. If you weren't quick-witted, people were just going to try to bully you around. And it forced me to do two things. One, I became the push-up, sit-up guy my whole life. I had to do something to put a little muscle on. And
Yeah.
so it allowed me to create some habits early on the simplicities of I'm going to do push-ups and sit-ups every day.
Wow.
And then sometimes 3 times a day until I see that it is going to make a move. And
Wow.
so it allowed me to understand things weren't going to be easy. I was not like I was a brilliant student growing up. I had to, if I read a paragraph, I'd have to read several of it several times,
Mm.
whether it was the full paragraph or nuggets of it. So again,
Yeah.
I had to be patient with things,
Yeah.
which also developed into some of my leadership style of
Yeah. Okay.
understanding that.
That's
And
interesting.
then I remember at the age of probably 10, watching the US Olympic hockey team win what inevitably became a gold medal. These
Wow.
amateurs come together and they do something special that nobody thought they could do. And
Wow.
so I took this scrappiness and resilience and have to be quick on my feet, my love of sports, of team, of early leadership going on. And I really think that got me enamored at a pretty young age. I started my own little odd jobs business at probably 12 years old, cutting lawns and delivering
Yeah.
papers and whatever I could do to sell things, I would sell them. And I think those were some of the roots that I had. And then my dad was a textile salesman, and I used to overhear and eavesdrop some of his conversations after a long business trip. My mother was a teacher, so she was the teacher that would, out of her own pocket, purchase stuff for the students. So really the
Wow.
community and coaching. And then my dad's sales and negotiating and corporate America
Yeah.
really was probably rooted in who I eventually tried to become.
That's interesting, and it's interesting because that background that says a lot about you. And there's a couple of things that you talked about. Being the push-up, sit-up kid, doing it 3 times a day. There's a discipline there, and when we talked last time, we talked about attitude, and I think effort was the next thing you used. And I think there's something there about putting that effort in to do what you need to do because you had a purpose there. You didn't want to be seen as the skinny little kid in the corner.
It brought two mantras. One, consistency beats intensity. So I always use this term, death by 1,000 paper cuts, is I'm going to slowly and methodically continue to believe in that process and hopefully become a practitioner of it.
Wow.
And it's funny, I tell my nieces, nephews, kids, Do you know how you can become wealthy? And they say, how, Uncle Eric, or how, Dad? And I say, slowly. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
Because there is no overnight fix. There is no power drink that's going to help me. There is no one thing. We all look for shortcuts way too many times. Consistency beats intensity.
Yeah, and I love that, and I'm going to use that thing with my kids. Actually, slow. It's the compounding effect, as Einstein would say, was the biggest wonder of the world. And I think you're right. It's that compounding day after day.
Yeah.
So let's just flip that into this world of culture in that case, because I think that jump start. It's very easy to get started. Well, it's not easy, but it's a process. We all have that motivation on day one. But you've got to sustain it day in, day out to keep going at it. And it's the same with investing. You can't just put your dollar in, your pound in, and hope it's there. You got to keep doing something about it. So sustainability becomes a big word here. What is it if we're thinking now about the building blocks for building culture in an organization? What do we need to do to sustain this over not just weeks and months, but maybe years to help keep the culture alive and living in the organization?
For me, there was a decision of what are the number of things that we all could do in a typical month that would allow us to be really successful. And there's many answers to this. There's
Yeah.
not just one, of course. For me, I identified about 6 or 7 things that if not only I could deliver, but my team could deliver to their team, we were going to be in really, really good shape. Some of those are as simple as number one, I needed to be in the field at least twice a week, doing a rotating visit, learning, listen, observe, and learn, show, observe, and shape, understanding some of these challenges. And if I could do that every week, I was going to be in really good shape.
Yeah.
I'm going to, reality, perception reality. What is actually happening and what are some of the true challenges that our team is facing? And am I too high level up thinking we're on the right path? So it was a good reality check. It's what the former CEO of Starbucks is doing or was doing, where he would spend a half a day with his baristas.
Yeah.
It's just a magical thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing was I would at least attend one training a week. So we would get our team together and we would have a training class or administrative building. And if I could witness who's delivering the training, how are they delivering the training, and is our team aware of the initiatives when I pop in, that was really, really important.
Yeah. Love that.
I had 9 direct reports at that. We would call them performance development meetings. If I could do one performance development meeting with each of those department heads, that was going to be a really good place also for me. If I didn't see them too much, I had that time to commit. I would normally do a couple of reviews a month. If I did a couple of employee reviews a month as they rotate, your
Yeah.
yearly, I was going to be in really good shape. I was going to do statement, we would call them, or financial analysis of the team. If I could sit with some of our district managers and really learn and sit down and go over some of those financials, is everything applying and hitting the road? That would be good. Every other month, if I did my think tank meeting, there were just I had to get the pull from the people of
Mm.
what was going on. And
Yeah.
those were just a few things that allowed me to ensure, okay, it's happening. Uh-oh, it's getting stale. Uh-oh, do we need a shift? We got to be very
Yeah.
careful because we don't want to just change for change's sake. And those were just some simple things that allowed me to feel comfortable. But as you said, I use an example of brand and culture. Brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah.
Workplace culture are the behaviors that exist when leadership is not in the room. And I
Yeah.
needed to find a way to check the pulse of what was going on within the organization. And when, after the listen, observe, and learn phase, something was
Mm.
off, is where we had to make a decision. Behind me, and you won't be able to see it, there's an hourglass, and we can
Yeah. I
get
can
into
see
it
it there.
later. But that was an approach we would use when we saw something that was off, which we could at some point explain that approach to building culture.
Yeah, I love that. So there's a number of things there, isn't there? So actually, so going back to what you said about Howard Schultz going into the stores and being part of it and being barista and learning, but just touching around, finding what's going on the ground, talking to employees, being on the front line was one of the key things I'm picking up there. And you said about attending that one training a week. So getting in there and just understanding what's happening. So there's a big thing there about being part of the team, making sure you're seen around, And then you talked about the performance development meeting. So you're actually getting in to talk to each one of those 9 direct reports just to help them maintain their edge all the time. Because I think this is the key piece. It's a bit like, we talked sports last time, and Olympics. We're in the Olympic year from just gone from Paris. There's a 4-year cycle here for the next Olympics. So people have got to be maintaining their edge. They're looking for that marginal gain all the way through. And you've got to be motivated to do that. You've got to be on it all the time. And it takes focus. It's a bit like that magnifying glass that you can hold up just to look at what's really going on. And I'm hearing from you, it's about just that consistent approach, getting in there, talking to people on a regular basis, touching the ground, finding what's happening.
Yeah, and in those settings, making it count. That's the time and energy when we were talking about time management. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to not only have the time to do it, you must bring the energy. And in the meetings I would have, there weren't many surprises. The surprises were going to be on them when they might not have executed
Yeah.
because they knew what we were looking for.
Yeah.
They knew what a morning huddle would be like first thing. They knew what a performance development meeting would look like. They knew how they were going to get ranked on in the reviews. They knew what we were going to discuss in the training class, everything in alignment. There were no surprises, and that was the goal. And the moment we saw things getting off, okay, bring our think tank, our senior leaders together to try to understand, do we really need to pivot? What's missing? Because sometimes things can get boring. It's funny, there's burnout and bore out.
Well,
Burnout, hopefully by supplying the training, you get people energized and not as anxious. Bore out is where there's just no purpose here. Why are we doing this? Our initiatives aren't
yeah.
working. I'm tired of it. And knowing, and you have to have your finger on the pulse, hence the leadership presence of,
Yeah.
uh-oh, this is getting a little stale. What can we do? I call it the behind the back pass. Is
Yeah.
it something that we can make a little bit sexier, as they say? Is there something that would make people a little bit more inspired to execute it?
Mm. I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Keeping that, and I love that about a little bit more inspired to execute it. Just to build on that, I think is key because actually we start to take things for granted and we lose our edge if we're not continually on it. So I love that as a phrase. Let's think about it in that case because when we talk in scaling up, we talk about preserve the core and maintain and stimulate progress. And the core of the business is built around its values, the purpose, the dream of where we're going, as Jim Collins calls it, the big, hairy, audacious goal. But then as we move the business forward, we've got to stimulate progress as well because we can't rest on the laurels of what we had. We've got to put that in the ground, but actually we've got to keep going. We've got to keep doing it. And I'd love to think about that in terms of long-term success because often it erodes over time if we don't do it and if we're not in the room. And as you said, culture's what the employees do when the boss isn't looking.
Yeah.
So we've got to make sure it's instilled. So I wonder if we could go through each of your 5 principles and think about, one tip from each one of those that you could just start employing today. Because again, if you're a scale-up business, you need to be doing it. If you're a startup, hey, put it in now. If you're a corporate, you should be doing it. But I think there's some tips there that we could really build on if you're happy to do that.
I'd love
Let's
it.
dig in and see what comes up.
I'd love it. I mean, I think we could start with the strong relationship with your manager. So what I challenge people to think is, what are those 2 or 3 things that you presently do?
Yeah.
And of course, is it working? For me, the simplest one is, what's the initiative you encourage that backs your values of the company that supports relationship building? For us, there was a simple one called the 30 minutes of fame.
Okay.
And what we would do is our managers were encouraged to meet with their teammates up to 2 times a month. In the beginning, it is just a little bit personally. It would be, Phil, what motivates you? What management style gets the best out of you? Hey, tell me something you're most proud of. And then it would eventually transition to personal and professional, where it really does have to be about how are you doing on the numbers that you have set to hit. And so we called it a 30 minutes of fame. What's your initiative that helps build a strong relationship? Now, there are a number of different areas, but that's the simplest one that you could begin with.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I know, and I love that in terms of having a bit of a slogan there, 30 minutes of fame, and digging into that, because actually, therefore, you're building that strong relationship with the manager. And I think if we, relate this to anything like, I'm a big fan of the Gallup Q12, and looking at the things that demotivate people. And one of them is, my manager and that relationship. And that's one of the key things here. How do we build that so that we know that the manager's looking out for me and giving me the tools to do it, but also has got my needs at heart as well?
Yeah, there's two important add-ons. One, it is the number one reason people leave the company is an immediate dissatisfaction with their manager, and
Yeah,
their manager plays a bigger role in their healthcare than their primary care physician. I mean, who would think that is even possible?
that's interesting.
So the other important thing is where I think companies fall is, hey, we have a 30 minutes of fame. Well, right, but did you teach people how to truly administer a 30 minutes of fame? Do they know why we do a 30 minutes of fame? Do we know it scales back
Mhm.
to creating strong relationships? And so they'll just come out with all these initiatives and forget we've got to teach people of how to actually administer this, what this could look
Mhm.
like, and that's a training process.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a training process to do it consistently. Do it the same thing. As you said, people knew what they were doing when they came in certain meetings. It was the same thing over and over again. Routine sets you free, as Vern Harnish would say.
In our branch manager orientation, the one thing we added was how do you deliver a 30 minutes of fame? It would never go away.
Uh,
And so
yeah, I love that. Okay, so strong relationship manager, number one, great one. 30 minutes of fame. I love that. What would come
So the
next?
second is clearly communicate your goals and expectations. I would just simply say, we might have touched on this earlier in the first episode, but look at your 3 to 5 key priorities
Mm.
and identify how often we talk about them versus what setting. And let me run through an exact example.
Uh,
So let's say you're at a bank. Okay. So you are the CEO of a bank. And each sector, which is beautiful, has their own 3 to 5 key priorities. So a bank might want to have their lead teller meet in the morning, first thing with their tellers. And they're simply going to do it in a less than 5 minutes and say, Phil, here's how we're doing with our compliance and documentation protocols. That would probably be pretty important to a bank. Here's how we're doing with our cross-selling opportunities. Here's how you're doing with your cross-selling opportunities. Here's how we're doing with customer retention or satisfaction, whatever those 3 to 5 are. Now, the great organizations, of course, don't stop there. They then have their assistant manager of the bank weekly, right? Weekly meets with the lead teller. And guess what they're going to go over? Those 3 to 5 key initiatives, compliance protocols, the
yeah,
cross-selling opportunities, etc. But they
yeah,
don't stop there. You then go to the branch manager monthly, would meet with the assistant manager, probably a longer setting, a half hour, maybe it's your 30 minutes of fame there, it's the hour. And they're going to talk about those same 3 to 5 key initiatives.
yeah,
But they
yeah,
don't stop there, right? Senior level meets with the manager quarterly. CEO meets with senior level biannually. Board meets with the CEO yearly. And
yeah,
while they're all going to have different flavors, because I think we'd agree the lead teller might be slightly talking about a different piece of the initiative that the CEO might have with an HR leader. But that's a simple way, whether it's in person, virtual, however you mix it, to truly take these initiatives and tie them together. And of course, as I would always say, but you better take those strategies and put it in the training and the review process so you have chances to touch points.
yeah. Love that. And I love that in terms of that clearly communicating. Because as you said, at the end of the day, it's because when people aren't getting that, and I think, looking back at my notes from last time, we talked here about um, less than 60% of the teams felt that was being done for them, for individuals. So actually, by doing this, we're doing it regularly. And I always use the phrase, keep the main thing the main thing. Keep
Yeah,
focus on it because that's the key. And if there's 3 to 5 things, it's one thing, but just be really clear. What is it you're focused on so people know what it is? And then that cascade. So everybody knows how their bit of the pie comes together to build the whole puzzle.
absolutely. So that would be the a simple step for the, and that was really the A. We could go B and C, but we'll just give the A because there's stuff you could do with the other B and C. And then the third is the right material, equipment, and information in order to achieve that desired outcome.
Yeah.
And I would recommend that people do a needs assessment and a needs assessment on the training material. So I would do that up to 2 times. If you only do it once a year, that's fine. But as you know, things change within an organization and a new initiative could come in and
Yeah.
you need to look for knowledge and skill gaps. And so I remember once we had too many complaints were getting to me and I didn't understand it. I was really concerned with why these basic blocking and tackling was getting all up to me. And so we met with our think tank. We came
Mm.
up with, hey, I think we're missing this empathy gene. We've got to go back and we used empathy. We found a gap. We
Wow.
put that gap into some of our leadership training
Mm.
because empathy is misunderstood with sympathy. So empathy is I can vicariously live through the shoes of you, but I have not necessarily been experienced to it. Sympathy is I get it. It's happened to me. I can understand that. And so empathy is this actively listening gene that is
Yeah,
really, really
yeah.
important. And so looking through a needs assessment is really, really important under the right materials, equipment, and information. And if you could just do one thing, you do that.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that thing about filling that need the knowledge and skills. As you said, you had too many complaints coming up to your level, so that you're looking at okay, what's going on. And what I love there was also you then went back to the think tank to say, okay, what do we can do? How can we come up with ideas? How do we solve this problem? And actually that focus on one thing and say, right, how do we now bring that into our training? So you're resolving the issue, you're listening to what's going on, and you come up with solutions that can actually be put in place and trained there. So we can develop that emotional attachment to what's going on for people through that empathetic level as well. So I love that process and that connection between the two angles. So in that case, we've now got a strong relationship with the manager. We're building clearly communicated goals and expectations. We've got the right material and equipment. We're training the people with the right capabilities. So we're starting to build that bench strength of the team, but we're continually working on it as well. So great. There's the first three. So what comes next?
So that's the encouraging personal and professional growth. And these are just some simple things. I find organizations don't set personal goals, so they have no idea what Eric Stone would like to do personally. Do I want to be a third-degree black belt? Do I want to buy my first house? Am I trying to learn a second language? What are some of the things I am personally trying to achieve?
Mm,
And it is simple. That can be tucked into initiatives, hence my 30 minutes of fame. My beginning might be just about some personal goals. How am I doing with my karate lessons? Whatever it might be. And then professionally, I always encourage the career mapping. Where in your organization are you sitting down and going over with your team for a professional development, some career mapping of where do they best see themselves serving this organization and
mm.
based on their skills? What are some of their short and long-term goals? Sometimes people do need to be repositioned within an organization.
Yeah, yeah. And interesting, isn't it? Reposition within an organization, but also I wonder how many managers think, hey, Eric, I don't think this role is right for you anymore. You've done a great job, but maybe there's a better organization that could better suit your needs outside. And that comes back to that conversation we had earlier about the conflict, and some
Yep.
people don't deal with that up front. And I think if you're doing that personal growth, you might just notice someone and say, Eric, I think there's a better role for you somewhere else. I think you've done your time here. And people don't want to let go of good employees, but actually maybe they need to do that sometimes.
Character comes in for sure on these decisions. So first of all, if again, it'd be a disservice if I'm going to keep allowing someone to fumble over what they're doing and tolerate that. At the same time, sometimes they just don't match, as we were saying before. And it is hard to say not here because it's almost as if you let yourself and the company's letting somebody down. But
Mm.
there was another point that I will hopefully circle back to because I lost my train of thought with that thought. But I think that is something that I would be looking into.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. No, I love that. I love that. And I think there's something there in terms of that career mapping as well, helping it and how do you serve the organization. So I love that. So we've now got 4 points there. Let's go for the next one. Where do we go next?
Last is recognizing top performance,
Yeah.
and I think there's a couple really easy steps you could do. I think number one, go back to your organization and look at how many things we actually recognize and reward. Now, it shouldn't be 17 and it shouldn't be two.
Mm.
The other thing you can do with that same exercise is are they diverse awards? So we don't just want all sales awards, we don't just want customer service awards, but do they almost map the values your company
Mm.
espouses? And are we rewarding that behavior? That's when you diversify. So maybe you're trying to put together a mentor program and you want to recognize those that take it serious. And so you might reward a mentor of the month, of the quarter. There could be a customer service award. There could be, if documentation is really critical, you have the publisher of the month,
Yeah.
because they know how to write
Love
some
it.
stuff. But
Yeah.
just being diverse with the awards, I would also say, what do they want to be rewarded with? There was a company, have you ever heard of Sephora?
Yeah, yeah. My daughter's well into Sephora. Tell me about it.
So, the importance is step one. Do they want money? Do they want a certificate, a plaque, a day off, a day with the CEO? What are the things that they want? But be mindful of a little bit of a hiccup that Sephora had after hitting 10 billion in sales. I don't know if you heard what they did,
No.
and they meant no harm by it. It was perfectly innocent. But they hit, I think, 10 billion in sales, and everybody got, hold your breath, Phil, a cookie. That's what they got is a cookie. And rumor has it, as you know how disengaged employees can go, a stale cookie at that. So just be very careful of what you are truly going to reward.
Yeah.
So those are just a couple simple things.
That's a great example. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've all seen bad examples where things go wrong, where companies get wrong. And, and when you're hitting the headlines like that, that's not a good sign for future employee engagement. Because as you grow, it just amplifies the situation there. I wonder if you've got any companies that you know of, and you may not be able to mention names, where they've made all this happen and what's been the long-term result. Because that's the thing, it's the sustainability we talked about here. So when we talk about those 5 points you raised there, and again, you've only just given us a snapshot of that, but
Yeah.
sustainability is key. And I'm an engineer by background, so I've talked about momentum, getting that flywheel spinning in and the mass moving. You got to keep it going. The momentum will take it, but you've got to keep it going in the organization. So have you got any examples there that you could either talk about or just allude to of where they've got it right?
I think sometimes we forget to talk about the little deli down the road instead of saying Amazon and all of these spectacular. We can't underestimate the value of the mom and pop
Yeah.
who just find a way to make it special. As I always say, they make it special, they make it count. They take the customer experience with the employee experience, and it's just magical. I
Mm,
think sometimes also, Phil, it's the organization who got it wrong and then corrected it. Where my nephew is with Abercrombie and Fitch, and they had this big Netflix toxicity special, and their leadership made some significant changes from what I'm
mm,
being told based on how they hiring practices, advertising, and how they've
yeah.
changed the overall layouts of stores, the employee experience, where I think they're making some really big traction. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's just the store down the road
Yeah.
that you keep going back to because of those experiences.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting, isn't it? And I love the fact you mentioned the mom and pop businesses because, our audience is most of those scale up businesses and most people wouldn't have heard of them. We've got
Yeah.
some big clients out there who've made it to the billions, but it's those small businesses that sustain it over time. And I think that's the key to it, is about building that culture. And if you think about those 5 tips you've just given me just now, they apply to every business. But if you're a small business, you can do each one of those really easily. You may not even call yourself a manager because you're in a smaller business, but actually, if you've got people that are working for you, you're managing them and just building that. And I love the concept of the 30 minutes of fame and getting it on the plaque there. It's a bit, and just getting that information out there, I think is a brilliant way to just generate that momentum and keep sustaining it.
And what you'll notice is sometimes your initiatives cross several factors. So the 30 minutes of fame builds relationships. It can
Yeah.
also supply clear expectations. It also transfers to the right material and equipment.
Yeah.
It is encouraging growth. And depending on if you're going to reward it. So that's what makes organizations they just get it
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it always makes sense. No, we do our 30 minutes of fame. That's how we create relationship building. That's how we build personal professional growth from our employees. That's how you're just talking about it. My regional manager used to always say, at the end of the day, I'm exhausted because I'm always saying the same things. And it's a pro and a con
Yeah. Yeah.
because we're not going to change it up. We are going to continually, this isn't going away. Organizations struggle when again it's constantly the flavor. And
Yeah.
so he used to say, Eric, I feel, and I'm like, good. Well, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to reiterate, reinforce, empower, talk about it, thank them. And
Yeah.
so those are the things. It is not easy. It is exhausting, but isn't anything worth accomplishing.
Yeah. When I talked to Vern Harnish about this before, we talked about, when employees get it, when they do a parody or a skit at the end of the year and they say the same words that you've been using to them all the way, and you think, at last they get it.
Phil, my regional marketer will laugh. He used to imitate me because I had my mannerisms down. Because listen, I was an open book. I wasn't trying to surprise you or trick you. There
Yeah.
were certain things I look for, but he would have my, maybe if I brought my fingers up or pointed or in alignment, whatever I might do. And you're right. It's those artifacts. It's the artifacts and the mood that are part of workplace culture where you go in and you really do have these mini me's, but not intentionally, where they do enjoy and embrace. And they got to poke a little fun at me too. I mean, why
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, you're in it together, and actually, but it just shows it come together. It's the team, it's that culture, and I think when you can build that, Patrick Lencioni talks about the five dysfunctions of a team. But if you overcome those dysfunctions, you get that accountability, you get that attention to results. People are willing to challenge each other, and it's all based on trust. And I think what you've talked about over this two podcasts is very much around building that. The jump start is just the beginning. It's the sustaining it, keeping it going, and that's the key to what I'm hearing there. And there's a whole journey I think a lot of people can learn these techniques on. But and I think it links back to small businesses, large business. We can all start doing this and build a better culture, because that builds a better place to work, which actually, as you said on the last podcast, people can go home satisfied and pleased with what they're doing rather than frustrated with the workplace they've been in all day.
Absolutely.
All right, yeah. Eric, it's been great to talk to you again. Thank you for your time. We talked last time about where people can find you, and Eric, we said we'd put the details in the show notes here if people want to get them. We have them on the website. This podcast goes out on all major podcast routes, whatever you call it, channels. So hopefully we'll get that message out there and help you coordinate and communicate to more and more people. And I look forward to seeing the next in the Jumpstart series at some stage, A Labour of Love, because the workplace culture, as you said, it's just the first. You heard it here. So thank you. One final question for you before we go in that case. The last time I asked you, the bit of advice you would give yourself, and you talked there about the networking. You and I both got kids. We've both got grown-up children. Often people have a different attitude to the workplace here. If they go into a workplace where this isn't working today, what do they need to do?
I think they have to have the courage to first try to fix it. And that means having that difficult conversation actually with your supervisor, and being willing to share. And hopefully this is the important thing about relationship building, and hopefully they're comfortable enough or have a mentor who could kind of guide them to have a difficult conversation, stating the fact that I want to contribute, I want to be part of this. And at times I notice, or what would be a way, Phil, that I could provide you some feedback without you getting upset.
Yeah.
Everything is how you frame it. And so I would say when it's not working, and I've worked with way too many people who have first try to see if we can solve this. Is it just the manager piece? Is it a values piece? What's the thing that's missing? And what's going to be different at another company?
Yeah.
But so first try to fix it before you just jump. So give yourself an opportunity by having some open conversations. I think we'd all agree that I've fallen short many a times,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean I don't have great intentions. And so step one is that conversation. When it is repeatedly falling short, when they are not doing some of those factors, I think you have to make a decision that it might be time to try something else. But first you got to do a few key elements before you just jump ship.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right, actually, isn't it? Because young people going to a workplace, they want to build a culture. And I think that's key. Try a few things to start with, build that team up around you, and look at how you can change things from inside to start with as well. So
yeah, they always say start with your own four walls, and so step one, even as you're having a struggle, still do the things that are required of you in your opportunity in your position to be great at it.
yeah.
Work in those four walls, and then try to seek somebody out who can guide you to have that, as we said,
Yeah.
difficult conversation.
Yeah, I love that. What a great approach, great response. Thank you. No, it's been a pleasure talking to you again. I appreciate your time. It's been good there. And I look forward to seeing more and talking again in the future. So, Eric, thank you very much for being a guest on the Sparks by Ignium podcast.
Bill, here's to jumpstarting everybody's workplace culture.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks, Eric.